Me start with an intro of Kevin. So Kevin's the CEO of Delphi Labs. Delphi Digital is one of the most renowned leader in investing and research in the Web3 space, where they've been a leader in many of the incubated projects within Terra community and beyond. And Delphi Labs specifically, it focuses on building technical projects on the ecosystem to lead many of the ecosystem development efforts. So very happy to have him here and share more about how the firm that started as a research firm built venture and also built the lab side to continue to add value to their community and portfolio. Very exciting to hear more about that. And Paul is a founder of Delta One, which is a Solana-based DeFi protocol. He started this as a student, as a CS student in CMU, and I thought it would be very interesting to hear from him directly on how he navigated space as a student, how he raised VC funding in crypto space, and how he's hiring talent and scaling, especially in Solana ecosystem. So thank you so much for having us. And I myself is a general partner at Hash. Hash is a crypto native venture fund. We've been investing in the space past 5 years, where we've grown our fund to about 5 billion in crypto assets, where we incubated Terra money in 2017, X Infinity in 2018, and Sandbox in 2019. So we do a lot of 0 to 1 incubating and seed investment in the early stage of Web3 ventures. So let me start with the kind of directly from Kevin and Paul on, what you guys do in each firm and what you guys have been focusing on lately. Kevin, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks, and great to be here tonight. As Baek said, I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Delphi Labs, and I'll give you just a real quick history on Delphi in general. Delphi was founded in 2018 by a number of folks who were doing institutional research, and they all fell down the crypto rabbit hole in 2016, 2017, and just couldn't focus on anything but crypto. So they decided that they wanted to really start to develop institutional grade research in the crypto and Web3 industry. So that's how they started. And the more that they started doing research, the more that they had projects that were emerging in this space reach out to them and say, hey, loved your research report on this. Would you be willing to help us out? Because we're trying to do either design or tokenomics, or we're thinking about some product design options, and we'd love your input. And so that led to some consulting business. And they did that for a number of years, and they were kind of integral with a lot of the DeFi protocols that helped kickstart DeFi summer. So they work closely with products like Synthetics, Compound, Aave, Axie Infinity. And through all of that work, kind of two things happened. One is they had the opportunity to do seed investments with a lot of these emerging startups. And that's what led to creating Delphi Ventures, which now has about 100 portfolio companies and over $1 billion in assets under management. And then they also decided that they had all this IP from both research and from consulting with these projects, that they felt like they could better put their resources to work in incubating as opposed to consulting for outside projects. So a little over a year ago, they switched gears and stopped doing any consulting work and started doing just this pure incubation model, which became Delphi Labs. And what we do is we build projects from the ground up. So we own them end to end. We fund and capitalize all the costs leading up to the launch. We don't take on any outside investment for these projects. And we launch them and push them out to the community. And that's where I'm focused. And in my role, I kind of have one major philosophy, which is we say Web3 vibes with Web2 professionalism. And the Web2 professionalism is something that I think a lot of crypto native teams just lack.
I love that.
Have that experience. So I've had a long career working in tech and consulting. I was Tepro 5, so I kind of went straight into consulting after that and worked with a number of different organizations. And I fell in love with crypto in 2015. And what I do is sort of bring that Web2 professionalism and help Delphi Labs execute. And we're at a team of about 60 plus now. We've got a dozen open positions we're trying to fill. And the more that we grow and the more that we scale, the more we have to think about how we actually execute and how can we execute very efficiently in an industry that moves so fast. So I probably took longer than needed, but that's kind of the quick background.
That was great. Paul, do you want to share more about kind of your journey into Delta One?
Sure, yeah, it's great to be here and thanks for hosting this. So yeah, hi everyone, my name is Paul. I'm a co-founder of Delta One, and Delta One is a delta neutral yield generation protocol on Solana. I got into kind of this area of yield farming and yield generation a little over a year ago, where I was kind of exploring on the side. I was still a student at Carnegie Mellon studying CS. And on the side, I was doing a lot of yield farming and like earning really good yield. You'll see all these like crazy projects where you'll earn like 1% a day or like crazy yield, and definitely like degen side of crypto. But I really felt like there's a need to kind of productize that and de-risk a lot of that yield, hence the delta neutral aspect of it. So for the Solana Ignition Hackathon, back in October, I submitted basically a productized version of the yield strategies that I was running. And the origin of that was that sure, like the yield was amazing, but you'd have like all of my friends at CMU and like my parents, and they'd be like, hey, how do we also start earning these like this yield? And how do we get into crypto and start like yield farming? And for them, it was just way too much of a complicated process. They were saying, hey, let me like send you my funds and you like manage this on my behalf. And it would just be like a really like tiresome process. So we productized that for the hackathon and got a lot of other interest from people who had the similar pain points. And yeah, since then, built out like a delta neutral yield generation platform where you can kind of invest in these strategies at a click of a button.
To kind of add on that, I'm curious how you put your name into the ecosystem, because I think I was one of the earliest people that I got to meet when you were starting kind of crypto journey and IDing on Delta One and the designing protocol, and you basically went from kind of nobody student to one of the hottest protocol in Solana ecosystem. How did that start? Like, how did you brand yourself? How did you get support from like Solana Ventures, and all the early stage funds that actually were part of the seed round in Solana when they just got started?
Yeah, I think that's the interesting part about crypto, because the funny thing is like in crypto, you don't really need to brand yourself, right? Like you'll go with pseudonyms, you'll have weird profile pictures of NFTs, and it's kind of like people have a focus on like, what are you building? Like, what are you contributing to the ecosystem? And it was especially in Solana, I noticed that you have like really, really top talent. I was really involved with the blockchain club on campus while a lot of folks had submitted to that same hackathon. And people just had a focus of like, there's just VCs who would be like really interested in the developer community. I think in a lot of crypto, you'll see that there's very, very few developers. So like if you're building anything, you'll get a lot of kind of attention there, which was really awesome. And you just, it was interesting, like 2 weeks after the hackathon was the Solana Lisbon breakpoint. And I basically like, this is 2 weeks before finals, and I had like a choice. I was like, hey, I either take this flight to Portugal or like study for finals. And I'm glad I kind of made that move. But you kind of meet a lot of people at these conferences. You just like build your network from there.
Yeah, that's amazing. And one shout out that I wanted to do was I guess when I was at CMU, I didn't see that many kind of undergraduate entrepreneurship programs at the time, and I was very fortunate to meet Dave, who's on the call today, to start the Innovation Scholar program. So I kind of helped out getting started, and I became first cohort myself. And that program really helped me learn about kind of venture side and startup ecosystem, because as a student, I didn't know anything, and I didn't really know how to navigate, how to even connect with people. And that program really helped me out. And what I'm really happy about right now, I think you guys are in like ninth cohort, right? Like 2023.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I get a new mentee every year. And my current mentee, Ishigun, is a president of CMU Blockchain Club. And I became friends with the founders of CMU Blockchain Club about 3 years ago. And they were only like 10, 20 people, but they've grown to now about 200 people on campus. So probably one of the most active and biggest club at CMU campus. And I noticed that, I think recent McGuinness competition that you guys did at the campus, the first place winner was also NFT crypto idea. And innovation scholars, current batch are all excited about kind of doing something in Web3. And CMU Blockchain Club, that's how I kind of got to meet, Ishigun and Paul and others. And they're all trying to be a founder, and which is very different, I think, environment and sentiment than when I was in school, where I think I was even as an innovation scholar, I think I was looking for kind of validation from VCs or validation from some of the alumni that I'm good enough. But just seeing how the journey of Paul going from student to building protocol in Solana and scaling that team, it really shows how different Web3 is as a kind of joining as a new talent, I think. Kevin, do you want to share more about how you guys have been kind of hiring at DeFi Labs? Because maybe this could become a kind of tip to people here on how they can break into crypto industry and getting a role. Because I've been chatting with Anil and other guys a lot, and you guys made quite interesting hires both in the traditional side, but also through Twitter anons. And I'm curious to learn more about it.
Yeah, so it is really an interesting game when you think about hiring in Web3, because what we're really looking for is the best talent that's a great match for our values. And we don't really care where in the world they live. We generally can't take on anonymous devs, but we can allow some people on our team to preserve a level of anonymity that might make them feel comfortable participating in this space. And so in that case, we find a lot of people through Twitter. And it kind of strikes me as odd, coming out of traditional Tepper, where you go through a lot of on-campus recruiting, and then from there you often network and use tools like LinkedIn. To think about Twitter as a place where you would get a job was a little bit surprising, but that's actually where I got the job with Delphi, was just connecting with people on Twitter. So we find that to be the #1 source, and it kind of starts with people who can share things that they're seeing happening in the industry or in the ecosystems where we're playing, that have a really interesting point of view, and get some reaction from that. So, it kind of, whenever I am talking with students or people looking to break into Web3, I often tell them to get on Twitter, start following the people and the projects that you admire, start to, get into some of the conversations that they're having out there on Twitter, and start to have a point of view. And if you can start to interact with these founders, that often will lead to some DMs and some private conversations and maybe a job opportunity. And so that's like one side of it, where we're looking for people who are already kind of in the crypto ecosystem. We do mix in some people that are coming from more traditional fields. Like, we've got a few people that have come to us from Amazon and from some of the big tech companies that we all know. And in those cases, really what it is, it's usually somebody that has a more mature skill set that matches with what we need, and has like a deep curiosity for Web3. Like, we're not generally going out and trying to pick people that have no interest or haven't expressed any sort of interest in Web3. We want people who are curious, interested, passionate about it. Ideally, they've been a user in decentralized finance applications, and they can sort of talk the game a little bit, and they start to see that's where the future is going, and they want to translate the skill sets that they've had from Web2 or other traditional firms and bring that into us. So we find like the right mix. It's probably like 70-30, 70 being more crypto native people, and 30% coming from traditional companies that are integrating into that Web3 vibe.
Yeah, that's awesome. One additional thing that I'm curious about to learn from both of you is, we're seeing influx of kind of talent coming in, and there's many different ways that people are solving problems within crypto. Curious how you guys prioritize some of the biggest problems that are happening in crypto as a both kind of investor mindset and also as a builder.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I'll say one thing that really interested me about Delphi and why I really like this as a group of people to work with is that their overarching mission is to help make crypto happen better and faster than without them. And you can break that down, and by better means that we need to be driving innovation. We need to be coming up with new and novel solutions to things, not just trying to copy something that worked on one chain and bring it to another so we can quickly get a token launched and make some money. And that's really that kind of is the backbone of everything we do. So when we invest, we look at a lot of the projects through that lens, like, are they doing something new and unique that's going to help make crypto better? And then on the build side, we do the same. And what we have done so far in our incubation projects is when we started labs, the team looked around and said, if we're going to build, where do we feel like there's the biggest opportunity to make the biggest difference? And at that time, the Terra blockchain was emerging, and we felt like there was such a great opportunity to build in Terra and bring a lot of the expertise that we had, but not just, again, copy, an Aave or a Compound as a credit markets onto the Terra blockchain, but to take it a step further and say, how can we improve on those models? How can we make a new credit and money markets that's better than what we've seen elsewhere? Same thing with the AMM, as we've launched a project called Astroport that's an AMM on Terra. How can we innovate in the traditional AMM model and start to bring more features and more functionality that helps make crypto happen better? So that I guess is the kind of the overarching lens that we look at things is, does it make crypto better?
Yeah, that's great. Maybe Paul, you mentioned a little bit about how you guys kind of started Delta One, in that you saw so many friction points and hard to get to actual goal of what you want to do in yield farming. Has that changed at all? Like, did the market improve? Is it easier now, or do you see any other bigger priorities or important pain points that you guys see that are coming up?
Yeah, definitely. I think kind of DeFi and crypto has naturally like formed a pretty big bubble, and people get very familiar with like the current standards and like how to engage in communities. But what you quickly realize is that there's a much, much bigger community and ecosystem if you kind of bridge those gaps into the traditional mainstream world. In DeFi, for example, like sure, like there's billions in like Solana, TVL, and in this DeFi ecosystem, and there's a lot to play around with there. But then you realize there's trillions of outside capital that you can bridge the gap to. And sure, we were building kind of solutions for ourselves and solving our pain points, and had a community of other kind of degens who would come in and like engage with us in Discord and be like a nice like fun time. But now as we like go to these events and we talk to institutions, we really ask ourselves like, how do we de-risk these products? Like it is a completely different skill set than building for the current existing Web3 to like bridging that gap of information. And that's really when like you see like Solana protocols, two-person teams that are managing like $1 billion plus in assets. And you can get away with that really easily in the current ecosystem. But when you kind of bridge that gap, you realize, hey, like we need to work with people who are like experts in finance. We need to work with people who like know sales and talk to other DAOs, or institutional relations. And it's not easy to necessarily bring those folks on from the Web2 world because it's a completely different skill set. So it's interesting because it's like there's something for everyone, whatever skill set you come with. And there's also like a really strong like concentration of, you can do a lot just with like a few people. So it's kind of balancing that.
Yeah, thank you. Since we have both panelists that are kind of very heavy in DeFi, I'll add a little bit of different angle on kind of NFT and gaming side. So for Hash, we built similar kind of labs structure called Open Studio, where it focuses on gaming and NFT entertainment. And the goal here was that kind of how similar to how Kevin explained how Delphi evolved into building different arms. We've been investing in the space for 5 years, and we realized that all of us founding partners come from engineering, founder background, and we want to do more. And there's so many gaps in the industry. And for us, from our perspective, the biggest gap was content layer on blockchain, because everyone was, chasing for a different yield and alpha. And, we saw a huge boom of crypto industry through DeFi summer, which created great capital formation, but unfortunately, it didn't really create like a high user engagement of user formation where people are genuinely interested to have fun or socialize or stay for consuming something type of content. So for us, we did it by acquiring a gaming studio. And we made it our wholly owned subsidiary called Unopen Studio. And now we have around 100 people in the studio where we're building 6 different kind of games, metaverse projects, DAO tooling on top of our portfolios to create that kind of foundation for people to build out different kind of entertainment, contents. And it's very early stage, like how others in this panel are building out. But we're seeing more and more demand of these different type of category of talents needed in the space that brings new type of a new wave of talents, like how DeFi summer brought many of traditional finance folks to get interested in crypto. When NFT boom, many of the music industry, entertainment, and creative industry to pay more attention to what they can do with Web3. I'm curious what's going to be next, but I think this kind of revolution of new industry being able to be part of Web3 is one of the best kind of part of being in the industry, where you get to work with diverse set of talent going forward and expand the ecosystem with your portfolio. One last thing before I go into kind of Q&A, because I'm seeing kind of good several questions here, is what are you guys kind of most excited about in this crypto industry? There's so many kind of, or even like, what are you guys most paying the most attention? Because there's a lot of macro factors that people are talking about in the crypto space, with all the things happening outside of crypto world. Would that affect the industry? Would that affect the private investing market? Would that impact the early stage token prices? And another end of how we've seen amazing growth of apps building on top of blockchain now, but none of them are fun. None of them are UX friendly. And there's new generation of kind of founders building infra tools like, authentication, scalability, identity, privacy, and so on. Curious, for Paul and Kevin, what you guys have been most excited about, paying more attention on what to come next.
Well, I'll go first, I guess. I like the way you characterized it, which is DeFi sort of brought in that first slice of users that are very, financially oriented, and there's a much larger market when you expand and think about, gaming and NFTs. And what I'm really excited about is some of the combinations between some of the decentralized finance tools and concepts with NFTs and with gaming. And I think when those things start to come together, we get some really exciting use cases. And I'll just give one example, is that all of the activity that you do on chain, I mean, it's all out there in public databases that can be aggregated and queried. And you could actually start to have things that reside on chain that represent a form of a digital identity or a digital resume. So for example, participating in certain DeFi projects, or being an early member of a community of a game that becomes really big, you can start to see some of those on-chain actions, and you can start to have some of those on-chain actions represented by things like NFTs. And those can start to become tied to an identity that you may carry with you into different Web3 ecosystems. And as these identities, as more of our lives become spending more of our time in digital worlds and digital realms, that identity is going to become more and more important. And I'll just give you one just sort of very simple example would be, if you see somebody walking down the street with a CMU hoodie on, maybe they went to CMU, but maybe they didn't. In the future, there could be a situation where you earn an NFT that sits on chain, that's tied to your digital identity, that actually validates securely and privately that you in fact did go to CMU, and then you can flex that in the digital worlds that are important to you. So I think that we're just starting to scratch the surface. Most of my focus is on DeFi, but I get really excited thinking about how big this market can be when you expand it and start to connect use cases across DeFi, NFTs, and gaming, and kind of this broader concept of a metaverse.
I feel like even as a robotics student from CMU, like showing off CMU degree as NFT might be too much of a tactic for me, but I think it's definitely coming. And I actually know some universities giving out a degree in NFT form recently. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think as a founder, I'm definitely also in the same boat of thinking a lot about the intersections of DeFi. You can imagine things where like you're in a game and you bought an NFT of like some weapon or some skin, and that money is being used to like earn you yield on like Delta One, or you're like a merchant and someone like paid you for coffee in USDC, and like you have like instant settlements to like earning yield at like a click of a button. And that interface of like bridging the gap into like mainstream is definitely very fascinating as a founder. But I think overall, just as like a person like building in crypto and like being active in the community, I'm very interested in how the culture is going to shift. I think like in Web2, you have like a suit of like how things should operate, how your everything down to like how your interface should look like if you're building a B2B SaaS startup, for example. Like everything's kind of like laid out. There's a tried and true method. But I think in crypto, you see this like very like huge like international focus. You meet people doing all these like different, come from all these different backgrounds and like don't really care about like following a certain tradition. And I think that really reshapes a lot. And there's a chance that you'll see things like kind of follow a lot of Web2 stuff, and regulation may kick in, and that can really affect the culture, certainly. But I think that's kind of where like this pivotal moment where it's like, where is this culture going to go?
Amazing. We'll move on to Q&A on Sli.do. The first question was from Dan on any tip you recommend for people getting started in Web3 to learn about how to build in the space. I will start, and maybe Kevin and Paul can share more about kind of how they've been helping other friends to ape into crypto. My usual recommendation is to become a power user yourself, because I think I get like 3 to 5 DMs every day from many people that I got to meet, throughout my life journey, and they share that they got to know about blockchain, Web3. They're very passionate about the vision. They want to do more, and they want to get a job or start something in crypto or invest in crypto. But what I often notice is that not many of those people are actually active users of current services available in Web3 space. And I think Web3 space is one of those pioneering space where there's no textbook, there's no up-to-date article that organizes everything. Because as soon as article comes out in crypto, it's outdated in some way. So best way to really keep up to date yourself and learn about where the industry is today, and where you see the pain points that maybe you can solve, is really being, I think, active user yourself and trying different services, trying differences, the updates, and trying governance activity, trying what it means to stake, trying what it means to try the yield farming activity through Delta One. Only through that, I think you really get to learn why DeFi matters and why it's so powerful, and also why it sucks, right? How painful it is to use it, and how dumb it is to look at it from traditional finance perspective. Because sometimes many of these I guess crypto degens that are solving TradFi or gaming through Web3 lens haven't done what TradFi have done for the decades, right? So sometimes they're solving problems that are already solved in TradFi because they just don't know how it's solved. And as they grow and become a big enough ecosystem, they start integrating different aspects into the system too. So I always recommend people to be active user first, and try yourself and talk about it, rather than trying to read from media or different articles to study up. Because I think I see this a lot, and I did it myself at CMU too. I always look for shortest way to study something and be smart about it, so that I can get A, right? But in crypto, I think there's no shortcut. You actually learn a lot by wasting time and wasting gas, and also sometimes even getting scammed, right? Like some of the interview questions I do at Hash when I hire someone or hire someone for our portfolio, I always ask, like, have you been scammed, or how much have you spent on gas? Because that really shows how I think actively you are trying different services that are coming out in the space. Yeah, maybe Kevin or Paul, do you guys have any other tips on people getting into this space?
Yeah, I would certainly echo, you need to be a user of different Web3 protocols, and that'll help you develop a perspective and help you figure out some areas that you might want to spend a lot more time in, particularly, as a builder, if that's the route that you're trying to go. And then I would say, once you've got a little bit of that perspective, to me, the best tip I could give you is to just dive into some of the communities, whether they're formed as DAOs and actively looking for community support and help, or if it's just a project that you're really excited about, get into the Discord, start getting into the conversations, start sharing input, feedback, anything that you can to try to add value to the project. And you can kind of start off as a bit of a volunteer, but the more you add value, the more you'll get noticed by the project team, and the more you may see some opportunities to join them in a role that maybe that you didn't even know was available. So I think Web3, one great thing about it, it's a truly really open and very welcoming ecosystem. If you just dive in and add value, you'll start to find a place, and I think start with projects that just really interest you at a personal level. And there's DAOs that are being formed for across every sort of interest group you can imagine. So just dive in.
Yeah, Paul, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I feel like I'd be echoing a lot of that. That's how I got involved, is through figuring out pain points. I think one thing's interesting is if you look at one ecosystem like ETH community, you can often take a lot of their pain points and maybe or see what's been built there and bring things to Solana. I know a lot of people that kind of do that, and that's kind of like a tried and true method.
That's definitely a big alpha there. One thing that I also saw was I work closely with CMU Blockchain Club, and I recently sponsored some of the students to fly to East Denver for participating in hackathon. And I love how they were actively putting themselves, just right into the community and just meeting everyone and just learning about what people are building and going to hackathon and trying themselves on what's available, what infrastructure is available, and what other peers at the hackathon are using, and why they're using it, why they like that over other solutions available. And I think after that week in Denver, these students were way more aware of what's going on in the industry, rather than just being kind of stuck to the kind of the media representation of where crypto industry is. And also, crypto is very open in that people welcome newcomers and try to help them out to get connected and build further. And I think that kind of connects into next question we have from Nicole on what tools or services would be most helpful to developers in getting their apps up and running relatively quickly, kind of like AWS for Web2. There are a lot of services that kind of comes to mind to me, but since Kevin and Paul, you're both building right now in the space actively, could you share more of what kind of stacks you guys been using and why you guys like that?
Yeah, I'll tell you, this isn't something that Web3 in my mind has truly figured out. So there's a lot of Web2 tools that are being used actively by Web3 builders, and that's just a function of the maturity of the tool set. Within Web3, we don't have really good decentralized versions of things like AWS yet. There are a couple of options out there, and there's definitely people that are building towards that. But I think in a lot of cases, you're going to build your tech stack using some fairly familiar tools if you've been a developer in Web2. But then there's a couple of things that I've seen much more commonly used in Web3. One is Notion. I absolutely love it. I can't imagine working without Notion these days. So that's certainly one. And then, there are tools for running your finances like Gnosis multi-sig wallets. That's something that, kind of is the backbone for the financial operations of a lot of Web3 companies. So you start to get into a tech stack that centers around your multi-sig wallet, and then you can tie that into, things like Snapshot for voting and governance. And the governance aspect is a bit of a unique thing to Web3. So you've got some tools that give you options for how do you actually put proposals out there to your community, ensure that they're voted and they reach the requirements for passing a vote, and then how do those tie back into your smart contracts for execution?
Yeah, I think we're in very, very like primitive times on like analytics and stuff, and just like basic processes of like deploying applications on the blockchain. You know, I spend like 7 hours a day trying to like upgrade a program, and it was just like super annoying. And I feel like there's a lot of tooling to be like built around this. I think that like, especially like on analytics, like a lot of founders, like when they're just about to get their project up, like that is like one of the last things they're thinking about, and like parsing data from the blockchain and stuff, and like putting a lot of good reports, and like creating something simple of like a dashboard or like a portfolio page. A lot of protocols like put that like way later in the roadmap, and I think there's like a lot of opportunity to build over there.
Yeah, just to circle back on that one, Paul. Yeah, I mean, the data and being able to grab the data from the blockchain that you may need for whatever it is that you're doing in your application can be fairly cumbersome. So there are some tools out there like in Ethereum, you can use the graph, but there are other blockchains that don't necessarily have that same infrastructure built. So one of the uniquenesses is sort of how do you query all the data on the blockchain to be able to use it in your smart contracts or your application? And I agree, it's still fairly primitive.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think we're also seeing, I think there's a big criticism in Web3 space that there's a lot of redundant work being done in terms of infrastructure in crypto space because it's so primitive. And also we often find our portfolio founders that started as a service or app focused team, but they couldn't find good solution to support their growth and end up building their own infrastructure or like mainnet or layer 2 scaling solutions. So it's something that's ongoing issue that industry will iterate on, I believe. Going on to the next question from Sangkap, we are building a product to connect NFT and real life objects for tracking and trading and have a pilot customer. How does pitching and raising money work in Web3? I guess it's a two-part. Maybe we touched a little bit on kind of the NFT real world object tracking. Like, have you guys seen any kind of examples there? I know few of them, and then many of them actually are in Asia that I know of than US. I think in US, I know like a project called 4K, which is combining like a luxury goods like Rolex, sneakers to NFT. And it's like an OpenSea marketplace of those luxury goods with NFT. In Asia, it's actually one of our portfolio company called Block Odyssey that work with many of supply chain companies on providing blockchain as a service for tracking these assets and supply chain. Paul and Kevin, do you have anything to add there, or should we move into kind of pitching and raising money in Web3?
I can, I don't have much to add on the first part, but I can talk about pitching and raising. Unless
Yeah, tell us how you raised 9 million.
No, so I think in any like new like kind of innovative technology that comes out, it's really interesting. Like I feel like hackathons have like a wave, right? Like if you have like, I feel like the last 5 to 7 years of like hackathons were like pretty dead in like a lot of Web2. It's like people building some cool like API connection. It's like the same thing. But when you have these like new innovative technologies, like those hackathon projects are the alpha. Those are like going to be huge projects. And if you look at like the Solana, the last few hackathons, every like winner pretty much that I could see has raised like $5-7 million or some crazy amount. And I would just say like we're at those stages where like all of those projects, like if you're a developer in the ecosystem for a lot of these ecosystems, like you're like kind of like gold. So it's like I think you wouldn't have a problem raising. It's kind of just get yourself involved in at the hackathon level. Happy to connect with anyone as well and help out.
Yeah, I would say, so prior to Delphi, I was a co-founder in a project called Apollo DAO, and we went on to raise a little over 2 million from investors. And this was about May, June of last year. And the process feels, fairly similar to what you would do in any sort of tech startup realm. You're going to put together a presentation deck. You're going to send that around to your network and contacts, and you're trying to get in front of a lot of the VCs. In this case, you've got a whole set of crypto native VCs, and you're going to get on calls and you're going to pitch them and you're going to share your idea. At the same time, the more you're building in parallel, the more that you can show a real product, whether it's live or still something that's on testnet. That's going to help you go a long way. But the core process is going to be fairly similar. You're trying to get awareness to your idea and your team and what you're trying to do in front of the people that are writing the checks. And the main difference is you've got crypto native VC funds out there who might not necessarily be household names unless you're into the Web3 industry. So I would say research the VCs, and there's quite a bit that's published out there around who are some of the good VCs in crypto. I would say, just like in traditional startup world, you've got good VCs and not so good VCs. So do your research on, the VCs that you want to talk to, and really look for those that are value added and don't have a history of sort of dumping the projects as soon as a token launches. So I would say that's, just sort of one thing to be careful of if you're raising, but otherwise it's going to feel fairly similar to raising for any tech startup.
Yeah, and kind of combining this question with anonymous question that I had here in the list, where in traditional way of building product, founder, product market fit, do you just iterate on to build out the business? As a venture fund investing in early stage crypto projects, I think one thing that I care most about is founder community fit. And what I mean by that is, in the Web2 world, when you build a successful business and product, like let's say Instagram, your Instagram product, and you grow and optimize revenue and go IPO or exit. But in crypto, when you build a successful product, you're building ecosystem, and the protocol, it allows other people to build on top of you or work with you. And that's kind of the biggest thing about crypto being composable with other projects. So when I say founder community fit, we care a lot about if this founder is able to this product. Not only that, but can you bring these third-party community members to be excited as you are about the vision that you're trying to solve in the crypto industry, and make them actually contribute, whether that's at community level, as a participant, or as a developer to build on top of you as an open source project. If you cannot really do that, I've often seen in crypto where product seems all okay, but no traction, no one cares about the ecosystem, and there's a momentum building. And and that's why I think we care a lot about how founders think about this, and if this is really the founder can resonate and speak same language with the community that they need to appeal to. If you're building a music DAO that uses NFT in some sort, you got to be able to speak same language with the music entertainment industry. If you're trying to build DeFi for traditional finance or fintech, you got to be able to build that kind of community. If you're building infrastructure solution like coring or like data structuring for Ethereum, you need to be able to build that developer community within Ethereum ecosystem to onboard them as a contributor. So that's something that I definitely stress a lot when I see kind of new founders coming to the space. I think the biggest question that we got most number of is there a focus on contract-based work when hiring developers in Web3? Do you see developers working on multiple protocols or open source projects at a time? Yeah, I think we've definitely seen many of those, especially within Terra ecosystem as well, and Solana. Paul and Kevin, do you want to start those answers?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think since crypto is so early, when a developer enters an ecosystem, they kind of have a vision on where their kind of protocol will fit with a bunch of other puzzle pieces. And oftentimes those other puzzle pieces aren't built out. So in like Delta One, for example, like we're building a yield source, but like now I go to an institutional investor and they say, hey, we need an insurance protocol to go with this, or we want to be able to borrow against some of our tokens. And then you're like, hey, like I can just go and like build this protocol out. And then you'll see like the founders we work with, they have like 11 protocols under their arm. And you realize like once you have some of this dev tooling in place, like you can go and like copy and paste and like build out all of those like Lego blocks. And I think some of it does run on contract work. I think most of the teams I know, like DeFi at least, are pretty lean and do a lot of the kind of contract work until they've really established their market, and then they can kind of go and hire long term.
Yeah, I've seen similar. I think there's a lot of devs that come into Web3 and they're not quite sure exactly, where they want to sink their teeth into long term. So they do some short term engagements or projects. Sometimes they're grants that projects put out there, so you can sort of pick those up. And if you've got the right skill set, you can do those and earn some money kind of as a contract that way. In other cases, it may just be a short-term assignment for a project. And it's fairly common to see a lot of developers move around and work on a bunch of different projects before they find something that they, ultimately may want to spend more of their time on and focus on. I'd say at Delphi, we tend to look for people who are full-time and focused, just because we've got so much to do and so much to build that it's hard to do so many things at once and be really good at them. So we prefer to get people who are a bit more committed, but we do bring on some contractors from time to time, just depending on the nature of the work.
Yeah, definitely. And, just looking around in my friend network and within like CMU friends, there are so many friends actually working at a day job at Fang or Tradify or consulting, actually doing side hustle for DAOs or crypto protocol, earning tokens for future, and I think it's one of the best way to learn about the industry, because it's more flexible. You don't have to put your reputation on stake to a certain protocol that might get hacked or might go down. And you also get to learn by building actively. And I think that's the best way to really understand what's going on in the industry and learn about kind of subtle, vibe of, working in Web3 organization, which can be very different than like working at Fang. And many times they end up becoming the, hottest target for protocols to hire full-time eventually, because they come with, great background of, let's say, building product or distributed systems, but also knows how it's like to work in Web3 organization. So if you see any opportunity like that, I definitely recommend. And if you're looking for one of those opportunity, I think Delphi, us, and also Paul can definitely help you guys out in locating where it could be a good fit. Next question is on hospitality industry in Metaverse. So any opportunities for restaurants in NFT, Metaverse, crypto world? I can start. I don't know if it's that helpful to the person who asked question, but we've been running our own restaurant in Korea, and it's a NFT gated restaurant where we have Discord channel for all the members of the restaurant, and you have to stake crypto to get into, to get the NFT, and we basically interview and kind of referral based invite. We're keeping it small because we don't have bandwidth to scale up, but it's basically kind of third celebrity, creatives, fun people, third, founders, startup industry, and third kind of random mix of interesting people. And it's like a Korean fine dining where every day chef decides what menu to give out. And when you go there, you meet interesting people, hang out with friends. And it's very transparent on Discord who's going that day and what menu is served. And because you can only get that food that day, it's kind of like NFT on its own. And people do governance voting to bring back certain menus that they really love. So it's a good experiment for us that we're just having fun to learn more about what it's like to build in real life DAO and NFT community. But I'm not the most well-suited person to share how NFT will disrupt restaurant industry itself or hospitality. but I've seen a lot of cases where airlines and hotel groups trying to use token model to transition from mileage points into token model that they can capture the community value that they have created over decades of business, rather than kind of dying mileage points to utilize and continuously add new benefits to keep it alive. Yeah. So regulation, I think it's a good kind of last question that we can kind of wrap up on. I think all of us on this panel are kind of working in somewhat of gray area in regulation, especially in US, especially DeFi protocols. Curious how you guys, see that as a threat, opportunity, how you guys been coping with that, especially in US. This session is recorded, so you guys can keep it light as well. So please share more, and I'll also add my kind of tips on how we've been helping our founders navigate the space as well.
Yeah, so it's definitely a tricky situation, particularly for those of us in the US, because it's just not clear on where some of the hard lines are going to be drawn. And I think that there just isn't enough, there's just not enough case history to be able to know if some of the things that we're doing in Web3 are violating, certain rules or regulations. So yeah, we are sort of operating in a bit of a gray zone, but there are things you can do to be on the lighter side of gray versus the darker side of gray. And the biggest issue that most teams face is when they go to issue a token and how that token is issued. And in particular, if you're selling that token in any sort of public forum, is going to put you on the darker side of gray. And you absolutely want to get legal counsel around how you issue that token. And that comes down to things like the legal entity and the domicile for where that token is being issued from, how you're selling it, and what particular restrictions you might be putting on the sale of that, and then how it's being continued to be distributed out to the community. So that to me is probably the number one thing. Make sure you get really good legal counsel before you start issuing a token, particularly if you're a US resident or a US based entity. And then, beyond that, there's other, I think, just basic regulatory do's and don'ts. Like, one thing you want to make sure to do is be very careful how you're shilling your own project, or how you're shilling anything that you have a financial gain to receive on it. There's a lot of this that goes on that I think is just sort of the wild, wild west, but people don't always realize that once it's out there in a public forum like Twitter or any message board, it could be, it potentially could be evidence. And so just use common sense on that. Don't try to pump something that doesn't have the proper disclosures and all that behind it.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that outside of development, the vast majority of my time is spent in regulation and legal, and it definitely slows innovation sometimes. But I think there's a lot of kind of good practices that have been settled for most protocols on do's and don'ts, things like geo-blocking and having certain disclosures. I think there's getting to be a lay of the land, and I would just encourage founders to not get scared away by that, and because there are good paths through that. But yeah, it's something to be very cognizant of, and don't be too degen, I guess. And as Kevin was saying, I guess be careful, especially on protecting retail, and being careful about the messages you put out there.
Yeah, for us, we realized that if you do anything in crypto and you're a founder, you kind of become part-time legal expert, because there's so many hurdles that you have to get through, and this is very different from Web2 founder experience, where you kind of scrappy start and iterate and break things and kind of build up. But as a crypto founders, there's many areas that you need to be very careful about, especially as a US citizen founder. So usually for us, we have 3 lawyers in-house in our fund that is actually not for fund lawyer, but are actually helping founders set up their entity, how they can, compliantly raise, there's no problem, and it's like tax efficient, so that not everything is like all tax as like a revenue or something like that when they sell token. So it's really a careful process that you need to work with peer founders and also legal experts to understand where you guys stand, and within the boundary of legal, options, can you really realize what you want to do as a product offering or service and go to market? And it's a balance, continuous balance that you need to manage, I think. But if there's anyone that want to discuss further on this area, I'm happy to chat. I think we just hit an hour, and I want to hand over the panel back to the CMU-T&E team. Thanks a lot for hosting us, and maybe Paul and Kevin, you guys can share your kind of Twitter or Telegram handle here for anyone that are interested in reaching out. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Baek, for moderating this amazing session on how to build Web3 startups. And for sure, we would like to thank Kevin and Paul for being part of this amazing panel and sharing the insights with everyone. And with that, we are at the end of this event. So look forward to next week, same time, Startup School's event on how to test and prototype a startup idea super fast. So we'll see you around next week. Have a good one. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So much.